Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. It was a night that promised to be like any other, but ended up becoming one of the most intriguing and frightening of my life. During the fraternity initiation process, we were challenged to something that, at the time, seemed like an exciting adventure, being blindfolded and dropped off at Fraternity Beach. Our mission was simple, or at least it seemed so, to find our way back to the fraternity house before dawn. The idea was to test our orientation, confidence, and perhaps even a bit of courage. The beach was shrouded in darkness, and the only thing we could hear was the sound of waves gently breaking on the shore. The blindfold was disorienting, but I trusted my instincts and the challenge ahead. Soon, I began walking on the damp sand, followed by other novices who were as lost as I was. With each step, the sound of the waves seemed more distant, and the sea breeze became colder. That's when I felt a presence behind me. Initially, I thought it was one of my colleagues, but when I heard hurried footsteps in the sand, I realized something was wrong. Panic began to set in when I felt firm hands holding me and pulling me towards the ocean. I struggled, my heart racing, and managed to break free, running in the opposite direction without looking back. I caught my breath as I stopped behind a rock formation, trying to understand what had just happened. The sound of waves and whistling wind were now accompanied by my panting breath. I looked around, trying to spot any of my colleagues, but the darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. The feeling of being watched was almost palpable, and the fear that those people might still be nearby kept me alert. I wasn't sure if I should go back towards the beach or try to delve deeper into the dense thicket that bordered the sand. I decided to move forward, trying to stay calm and focused on the task of returning to the fraternity. Each step was careful, and any noise, no matter how small, made my heart jump. That's when I stumbled on something hard, almost falling. I crouched down to see what it was and found a stick stuck in the sand with a piece of my shirt, which I hadn't even noticed was torn, tied to it. A chill ran down my spine. It seemed like a warning, a sign that whatever was chasing me knew who I was and might have been following me since the beginning of the night. Adrenaline was now my guide, and the fear of being captured again pushed me forward. I needed to think fast, find a safe way back, and most importantly, alert the others about the danger we faced. The fraternity challenge had turned into a race for survival. Carefully, I began to move towards the direction of the fraternity house, trying to use any reference that would help me not get completely lost. The moon, partially covered by clouds, offered little guidance, but I did my best to stay on the right track. Every whisper of wind through the trees and every crackle of branches on the ground seemed amplified, as if the environment itself was conspiring to keep me alert. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I managed to spot the faint lights of the fraternity in the distance. The relief was immediate, but not complete. There was still growing concern about what had happened on that beach and whether the others were also safe. The idea that someone or something might be after us, specifically targeting our fraternity, was disturbing. This thought accompanied me to the fraternity door, where I finally felt safe, but no less restless. As I crossed the fraternity door, I was greeted with expressions of relief and concern from some of the older members who were on duty, waiting for our return. Without wasting time, I told them about what had happened on the beach, about the people who tried to take me and the piece of fabric I found. The initial expression of skepticism from the listeners soon gave way to genuine concern, especially when other novices began to return, some of them also with stories of strange encounters and warning signs along the way. The conversation quickly turned into a debate about what we should do next. Some suggested that we should investigate, while others thought it more prudent to alert local authorities. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something deeper. Something that didn't just involve a fraternity prank that got out of control. The piece of clothing tied to the stick remained in my mind, as if it were a personal message, a direct challenge to our community. With adrenaline still running through my veins, I felt the situation required an immediate response. The fraternity had always been a place of camaraderie and support, but that night, it seemed we were all unprotected. A veteran suggested that we should unite and return to the beach to look for clues about who might be behind this, but the idea was quickly discarded as too risky. Instead, we decided that the most sensible thing would be to watch over the fraternity area during that night, ensuring everyone was safe. As we organized ourselves for the vigil, I realized that the experience had united us in an unexpected way. Even under the threat of something unknown, there was a sense of community and responsibility for each other. As the night progressed and the first light of dawn began to appear, the tension slowly decreased, but the uneasiness persisted. We knew that this couldn't simply be ignored, and that it needed to be addressed somehow to ensure our community would be protected in the future. The feeling that something bigger was at stake was undeniable. When morning finally came, the discussion about what to do next continued. We decided to collect statements from everyone involved and gather any evidence we could find, intending to take the case to the university authorities. The idea that this could be a warning or a specific sign for our fraternity was unsettling, and no one wanted to risk something similar happening again. In the end, the experience at Fraternity Beach became a story that would be told and retold over the years, not just for the mystery and fear it provoked, but also for the way it united us. To this day, no one knows exactly who those people were or what they really wanted, but the image of the piece of shirt tied to the stick never left my mind. It remained as a reminder that sometimes the unknown is closer than we think, and that we must always be prepared to face the unexpected. Second story, that night, the anticipation was palpable. It was my initiation into the fraternity, a ritual everyone awaited with both excitement and a bit of apprehension. The atmosphere was heavy with mystery, as if every shadow hid a secret. I was blindfolded as part of the ritual. My hands were cold with sweat, and my heart pounded in my chest. Everything seemed like a big game until I realized I had been left behind. Alone, in the middle of nowhere, the blindfold was the only thing separating me from the unknown around me. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself it was just part of the game, but soon the sound of footsteps in the woods began to awaken an uncontrollable fear. That's when I heard a rustling to my right, and soon a masked stranger appeared. Panic took over me. My legs trembled as I tried to understand what was happening. He didn't say a word, but the way he approached made it clear he wasn't there to help. My mind raced, searching for a solution. With a surge of adrenaline, I decided to run. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I needed to get out of there. The sound of branches breaking under my feet echoed through the forest as I rushed away as fast as I could. Fear guided me, and the determination to escape that nightmare gave me strength to keep going. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stopped to catch my breath. The sound of my heart was almost deafening, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave me. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but the darkness of the forest was relentless. Then, in the distance, I noticed a faint light flickering between the trees. Attracted by the possibility of finding help, I moved cautiously toward the light, hoping not to attract anyone's attention. As I got closer, I realized I wasn't alone. Whispering voices and low chants began to fill the air, making the scene even more terrifying than I could have imagined. As I got closer, I saw a group of people wearing masks, gathered in a circle around a bonfire. What I witnessed seemed like a ritual, something I had only seen in movies or read about in horror stories. They were chanting in a language I couldn't identify, and the whole scene had an air of mysticism and danger. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. It was as if I had stumbled into a parallel world. With my heart pounding, I hid as best as I could, observing the bizarre ceremony while trying to understand what was happening. The feeling of being in danger was overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay calm to find a way out without being noticed. As I remained hidden, my mind struggled to process the surreal situation. What did my fraternity have to do with this? Did they know about this strange ritual? I couldn't find answers, only the urgency to escape unharmed. Suddenly, one of the masked figures looked up, as if sensing my presence. Fear paralyzed me for a moment, but I quickly realized I had to act. Taking advantage of the chance noise to cover my movements, I began to slowly back away, each step carefully calculated not to draw attention. Finally, when I felt I was at a safe distance, I allowed myself to run again. Adrenaline was my only ally in the escape. The way back seemed endless, but the desire to leave that forest pushed me forward. When I finally reached the clearing where the initiation had begun, I felt an indescribable relief. The sky was starting to lighten, indicating that the terrifying night was coming to an end. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but I couldn't stop now. I needed to tell my friends what I had seen, to warn them before something worse happened. Upon finding my fraternity friends, the initial relief was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency and fear. Gathering them and recounting what had happened was a challenge, as disbelief was written on their faces. However, the seriousness in my voice and the desperation in every word made them pay attention. They listened intently as I described the masked stranger, the ritual in the forest, and the atmosphere filled with mystery and danger. As I spoke, I saw their disbelief turn to concern. It was clear that this initiation night had taken a turn no one expected. The situation took an even darker turn when, as we returned to the fraternity house, we found a mask hanging on one of the nearby trees. It was similar to those I had seen in the forest, and a chill immediately ran down my spine. The discovery cast a shadow of doubt and fear over all of us. Who had left it there? Was it a warning? There were many questions, but few answers. The presence of that mask so close to our safe space brought to light the reality that we weren't just dealing with a fraternity tradition gone awry, but possibly something much more sinister and threatening. In the days that followed, the tension in the fraternity was palpable. Everyone was on high alert, worried about the possibility of another encounter with those masked figures. We tried to keep up with our routines, but the shadow of what I had seen in the forest lingered over us. We discussed what we should do, whether to report it to the police or just try to forget the incident. But each of us knew that the mask hanging on the tree was a clear sign that we were not safe. The fear that something could happen at any moment kept us in a constant state of vigilance, as if we were waiting for the inevitable. To better understand what was happening, some of us began researching local cults, rituals, and any information that might shed light on what I had witnessed. However, the more we investigated, the more questions arose. There were no clear records of similar activities in the area, making it all the more unsettling. It was as if we were dealing with something that hid in the shadows, beyond our understanding. The informal investigation, which started as an attempt to understand what was happening, soon became an obsession for many of us. We spent hours online, diving into obscure forums, discussing theories and trying to piece together the puzzle. Some information suggested the possibility of a new cult, something that might be forming in the shadows of our college town. But the evidence was scant, and the line between reality and imagination began to blur. With each passing day, the invisible presence of the masked figures was felt, as if we were under constant surveillance, even without any concrete proof of it. The situation culminated on a particularly tense night when we awoke to a loud noise outside the fraternity house. We all rushed to see what had happened, only to find another mask, this time nailed to the front door. Terror quickly spread among us, and at that moment, we realized we could no longer ignore what was happening. It was a clear message, a warning that we were being watched and that our safety was at risk. We decided it was time to involve the authorities, hoping that external intervention could unravel the mystery and restore a sense of security to our lives. After involving the police, the calm we hoped for did not come immediately. The authorities took the situation seriously, but answers were slow to come. There were frequent patrols around the fraternity house, and we were advised to avoid the forest and remain vigilant. However, even with these measures, the fear persisted. The presence of the masks and the memory of the forest ritual remained vivid in our minds, a constant reminder of what we couldn't explain. Each day seemed like an act of balance between trying to carry on with our lives and dealing with the growing paranoia of being watched. As time passed, the incidents began to decrease, but never truly disappeared. The forest, which was once just another piece of nature around us, became a forbidden place, laden with symbolism and fear. The mask on the tree was removed, but the feeling of an invisible threat remained. To this day, the mystery has never been fully solved. Sometimes we still find strange symbols drawn on the ground near the house or hear unexplained whispers in the night air. What started as an initiation night turned into an enigma we couldn't solve, leaving us with a sense of vulnerability and the certainty that there are things we simply cannot understand or control. Third story, it was on a cold October night that everything happened. It was the famous fraternity initiation, a rite of passage that all of us freshmen awaited with both anxiety and a certain fear. The task for that night was to explore the city's abandoned subway stations, a challenge that mixed adventure with a touch of danger. My friend Chris Evans and I were excited, but adrenaline was coursing through our veins. The dim light from our phones barely illuminated the path as we advanced through the dark tunnels, following the instructions we had been given. The air was heavy, and the silence, almost palpable, was broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. As we explored, we began to feel that we were not alone. It was a strange sensation, as if someone was watching us from the shadows. Chris made a joke to ease the tension, but I could see he was as uneasy as I was. It was then that we spotted a figure in the distance, standing still in the middle of the tunnel. At first, we thought it was one of the seniors trying to scare us, but there was something unsettling about that motionless presence, observing us with an almost unnatural posture. Without exchanging a word, we knew we needed to get out of there quickly. It was at that moment the figure started moving towards us, and what had been a playful initiation turned into a desperate race for our safety. The race along the tracks was frantic. Chris Evans was a few steps ahead of me, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The figure behind us seemed to be gaining ground, and the darkness of the tunnel made everything even more frightening. Suddenly, we heard the distant sound of an approaching train, which only increased our desperation. We had no choice but to run faster, trying to find an exit or a safe alcove on the sides of the tracks. The uneven ground and scattered cables made the run even more challenging. In a moment of pure adrenaline and desperation, we spotted a narrow opening on the side of the tunnel. Without thinking twice, I pulled Chris and we dove inside, pressing ourselves against the cold wall as the train roared by us. The sense of relief was instant, but short-lived. When the train finally disappeared around the tunnel bend, we realized the figure had also vanished. We stood there, breathing heavily and trying to understand what had just happened. The question haunting us was, who or what was that figure? And why was it chasing us? Still bewildered and trying to catch our breath, we decided it was time to find the rest of the group and get out of there as quickly as possible. Silence once again dominated the tunnel, but now it seemed even more oppressive. Chris Evans looked at me, his eyes reflecting the same mix of fear and determination that I felt. We knew we couldn't stay there for long. We began to walk back, always alert for any sign of movement. Every small noise sent our hearts racing again, but the mysterious figure did not reappear. Finally, after what felt like hours wandering through the tunnels, we found an exit that led us back to one of the abandoned platforms. There, we saw our group, all showing expressions of relief upon seeing us. We tried to explain what had happened, but it was difficult to put into words the strangeness and terror we had experienced. Some of the seniors laughed, thinking we were exaggerating, but Chris's serious demeanor was enough to silence the doubts. Even in safety, the question lingered in our minds. Who was that figure and why was it there? In the days that followed, Chris Evans and I couldn't stop thinking about the experience. Every detail seemed etched into our memories, from the sound of our footsteps echoing to the fleeting sight of the mysterious figure. We tried to research more about the abandoned subway stations, but the information was scarce and often confusing. Other fraternity members joked about going back, but for us, it was no longer just an adventure. There was a mystery that we couldn't explain, and that uncertainty left us uneasy. Despite all the fear and adrenaline of that night, something in me changed. I realized how the thin line between the real and the inexplicable can be disturbing. I had never been one to believe in supernatural stories, but that figure in the tunnels defied any logic I knew. Chris seemed to share this feeling, and we often discussed what we could have done differently, or if we would ever have the courage to return. Even with all the unanswered questions, the certainty that we had come out of there safely was a relief, but also a constant reminder of the unknown that still lurked in the shadows. As the semester progressed, university life returned to normal, but the memory of that night never completely faded. Chris Evans and I became even closer, bonded by this unique and inexplicable experience. Occasionally, we met others who also had their own stories from the tunnels, each stranger than the last, but all sharing a common element, the mysterious figure. It was as if there was a hidden part of the city known only to a few, a parallel dimension where the unknown was tangible and frighteningly real even today. When I think back on that night, I feel a chill run down my spine. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully understand what happened, but I've learned to accept that not everything needs an explanation. Sometimes mysteries remain just that, mysteries. Perhaps that's what makes life so fascinating, and at the same time, so full of uncertainties. The important thing is that despite the terror and adrenaline, we managed to return to tell our story. And who knows, maybe someday, someone will unravel the secret of the subway tunnels.